Hello, I'm Andrew.
Hello, I'm Lisa.
Welcome to episode 66 of
Round the Archives.
the podcast with a criminal mind.
Yes.
Not really. Well, it's been a while since we've done a full episode around the archives.
Yes.
But we've done quite a few in-conversations in the meantime, haven't we?
We have, yes.
And it's been an exciting few weeks.
It has.
In the world of archive TV.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what have we had back in the last few weeks? We've had episodes of The Complete and Utter History of Britain, which just appeared.
It did.
On BritBox, as if by magic.
Yeah.
That was a lovely surprise.
Mm-hmm.
A Radio Hancock's Half Hour.
Yes.
With Harry Seacombe, which is very important because that's the only one of those that survive.
Yeah.
And we've had off-air recordings of Till Death Us Do Part.
Yes.
Including an episode that was only surviving as a soundtrack. That's Monopoly. That one. I think we've got that one somewhere, the audio of it. But yeah, exciting to have that back. And was it yesterday?
Yes.
I accosted you in the supermarket and said, we've got episodes of Mogul come back, episode of Hugh and I,
Yes.
and an episode of Sykes and A... ... That's quite nice because we talked about Sykes on Goon Pod a while ago, didn't we?
We did, yes.
So that was nice. And apparently there's more to come.
Ooh.
Indeed, if I take my time over editing, I might be able to announce something else by the end of the episode. But in the meantime, here's Nick Goodman, who joined us here to talk about...
Dr Snuggles.
Dr. Snuggles, friend of the animal world. Dr. Snuggles, dreaming of better tomorrow. Dr. Snuggles, you better stop working today. Dr. Snuggles, flying away to the stars. Dr. Snuggles, finding a path to the rainbow. Dr. Snuggles builds a clever machine.
So, Mr. Nick.
Hello.
Dr. Snuggles.
Dr. Snuggles, friend of the animal world.
Well, I thought about that. Dr. Snuggles, friend of the animal world, and I thought, well, you've got Animal, Vegetable or Mineral used to be a series, so he's the friend of the animal world. Is he like short-tempered with vegetables and ambivalent about minerals?
What actually that brings me neatly onto the first moral problem I have with Dr. Snuggles. I love the series, and we'll go on to that later. But there is a character called Nobby Mouse who is basically the dysfunctional brat of he's the Wesley Crusher of the cranked up a bit. He's this. Obviously needing an Asbo kind of little mouse with the t-shirt and the squeaky voice and the cheese kind of thing like that. He speaks like that, and he basically ruins every episode by pissing around on kind of if there's a gadget to make, he'll destroy it. And Snuggles, there is one thing you were talking about vegetable. Every single tree in the show is clearly sentient.
Yeah.
It's got a face. One of them interacts. One of them has a whole episode about them, the treacle tree, which is a treacle tree that spends most of the series holding this tin of treacle and looking sinister, like kind of in a sort of treacly sort of way. But Nobby Mouse goes particularly berserk at one point. Manages to land Miss Nettles, who's basically the Mrs. Hudson of Dr. Snuggles, the long-suffering housekeeper, sticks her up a tree, and to get her down on the tree, he chops it down.
Ooh,
he chops it down, and it has a face and a personality, and he kills it. Now, Dr. Snuggles should have actually, if he was friend of the animal world, he really should have actually taken this to task about and sort of build it, because he's got a machine for everything. This is a little inventor, got a machine for everything. He should have invented a sort knobby mouse out machine, because he is just. He seriously endangers everyone. And there's an episode where he goes back in time, and because he's stealing his wand and he wants to be the mouse king, and they should have left it at that. Okay, life choice. Bye bye. Move on.
I was going to say, is he the Scrappy Doo? But I don't think Scrappy
yeah.
Doo of the series. But I don't think Scrappy Doo actually killed many people.
No, and he was a little mindless brat, but he was on the side of the. Nobby Mouse seems to be working against them all the time. He never does any work. He's a thoroughly unlikable character and ruins every episode, but he's there for the kids. Yeah. But right, okay, anyway. I've got that out of my system. Right. But yeah, he's a horrible little brat, and he just kind of, and Snuggles is so nice. He doesn't do anything about it. Not a thing.
But when you suggested doing Dr. Snuggles as an article, I thought, I don't think I've ever seen it. My only sort of knowledge of it comes from Neil Gaiman's Don't Panic book, where chapter 18 mostly concerns Douglas Adams and John Lloyd's work on the book The Meaning of Life. But there's a couple of sentences about Dr. Snuggles, and he's described as a cross between Professor Brainstorm and Dr. Dolittle. And I know you said you remembered Brainstorm.
Yes, I in the 70s I would always pick off the Brainstorm book off the shelf and devour it. I loved his wacky inventions, and there is a germ of Snuggles there, most definitely. What's
interesting, it says that one of their episodes apparently won them an award, although neither of them has seen either the award or the series.
I have to say, because every single episode is lovably inventive. It basically throws imagination at you from the off.
Yeah.
And basically inanimate objects talk, and at the centre of it is Dr. Snuggles. But I think it's guessed the award-winning episode,
right.
And I think it was the amazing. Actually, I've written the Fidgety River, but it actually has every single episode the amazing, the astonishing, the incredible, and it's the Fidgety River, and I think he probably got that for his ecological.
I'm guessing that's what it is, because it's basically about. I mean, the message here is, hey kids, don't put shit in the river.
Exactly. Which
for 1979. People might be amazed we were making this point in 1979 and we still haven't done anything about it. But I remember the late 70s there was a lot of ecology in stories at this point.
And so it's amazing because it isn't preachy either. And the moral thing is the innocence from people, because at the end of that, basically a river. Everything has a personality. Everything that you wouldn't imagine has a personality. Wristwatches, clocks, pocket watches, trees, the lot. Even his shed where he invents everything, Rickety Rick, has arms and legs and hello doctor, and he's got this whole thing. But the river is nervous about going into the sea.
It's hiding in a cave.
It's hiding in a cave with a little voice like
it's all rolled up.
It's all rolled up. It's dehydrating all the wildlife and everything. But it's afraid of going into the sea because it'll disappear. And then you see chunks of the sea missing. And
very square.
Very square, very symmetrical, very kind of cuboid. Chunks of the sea missing, and the mystery is then rolled out. So and it unravels. Sorry, spoilers, sweeties.
It's all right. It's 1979.
It's 1979. But basically, when they go to this, you have planets for various things. If it's a plant-based thing, you have a plant planet.
Yeah.
With this one, it's birds that treat human beings like birds. And there's another character actually called. I was going to get to the characters later, but hey, there's a character called Winnie Vinegar-Bottle who's the witch. She's rather a beast witch, and she lives in this kind of castle which is covered in a bottle, and she keeps this bird in a cage, and it goes, oh hello, say Joey and everything, and you hear the bird's point of view, and so I don't know what to say to that.
I'm not called Joey.
I'm not called Joey. And you see the bird's point of view, and then you go to the bird's planet, and they do this reverse to humans. And they said, "Oh, I'm sorry." When it was described to them, oh, "I'm sorry, I didn't realise they don't like it." So we'll stop. Sorry, I didn't know they didn't like being caged, and it's very much morally from the bird's point of view. Again, with the aliens who nick the river in the Fidgety River, they I thought you don't need that bit because it's full of rubbish. You wouldn't want it. Oh, sorry, we didn't realise. I'll put it back. Kind of. And they aren't evil. And one of them, actually, I've got a note. They're called the Sloshies. And the leader of the Sloshies. What did I have about him? Oh, so it has an LGBT insignia.
Oh, he's got the rainbow thing.
The rainbow thing on his thing. So again, very, very ahead of its time. It's a show ahead of its time, and with the 70s innocence, So you've got the best of both worlds, really.
But not only have you got Douglas Adams and John Lloyd writing for it, you've also got Richard Carpenter as well, which surprised me.
We're not worthy king of children's TV or TV in the 70s and 80s. I mean, how prolific is that guy? And he's everybody. And you think Douglas Adams, you think out of the ordinary, crazy. But actually, he's everybody around. There's Paul Addis, who I think is the other one. And between the three of them, everything's raised up to a zany level. So it's not as if Douglas's episode sticks out like a sore thumb. They're all crazy.
But there are Douglas Adams things in there.
Oh, totally.
There's the use of Thursday.
Yes.
There's the whale. There's the whale that's in there.
There's tea. Lots of tea.
And there's also the Get Lost machine.
Get Lost machine. I mean, basically the premise is this inventor called Dr Snuggles, and where he gets his money from, I don't know. We never ask those sort of questions. Although
I think he's been up to no good.
I think so.
It's that wink at the end that I don't trust.
Now, Snuggles is a totally benevolent character, but he's not touchy-feely. He's your academic, cuddly character. And he he never embraces any of these characters. So he winks at the end, and we're of the opinion that I think he's not all he seems. He's a bit of a sly old devil, and even his closest friends call him Snuggles rather than his first name, which we never learn. But no, there's the two episodes that Douglas Adams wrote, along with John Lloyd, who I think was put in there just to make sure Douglas hit his deadline.
Now, Lisa, you've got a John Lloyd connection, haven't you?
I have. I once served John Lloyd's mum on a till in Sherborne.
Yeah, how did you know it was John Lloyd's mum? Because I'm sure she didn't flounce in and go, "Hello, I'm John Lloyd's mum."
She was talking to either the person in front or the person behind about her son, who was a television producer. And I think it was around the time QI started. And he'd just got this thing green-lit for television. But it had been a struggle. So
I just remember serving John Lloyd's mum. Oh, sorry, I'll just have the salad. Sounds like she's a dish. Yeah, basically Douglas wrote the disappearing mystery. But yes, Miss Nettles, the long-suffering Miss Nettles, the housekeeper, who's basically looks like everybody's primary school cookery teacher, very, very in a bun, little old lady, and she's constantly being tormented by Nobby Mouse, who, as I say, Snuggles should have dealt with that. Really, all she does is with this one, Douglas has a lot of fun with the machines that he buys. That he invents. Because he basically, they're lost. The characters, one by one, the characters disappear. I said, I know, we'll get lost ourselves. And there's a get lost machine which goes all over the place. It's a wonderfully random. And there's later on in the Fidgety River, Miss Nettles quite rightly resigns, and she goes. No, it's before she resigns. No, give notice machine she has as well. I think that might. I'm not sure if that's in that episode or not, but she's always resigned. So they give her a give notice machine, and she always comes back, so it returns. But there's one time, and again, this is very Douglas, where there's she has this posh friend called Madam Neptitude or something like that, and she always has tea with her every third Thursday. Right. But she can never, Madam Neptitude can never remember why she's turned up, and said every third Thursday machine. Again, lots of tea with is it the disappearing mystery or the fidgety, where the disappearing mystery, everything gets zucked into space, including their tea, Miss Nettles and Madam Neptitude's tea things, and they're all floating in space, and they've all got personalities. So you've got the tablecloth, saying, "Oh,
He wants to be a pillow.
He wants to be a pillow. That's right. Yes, he wants to be a pillow.
Well,
cover.
it did.
My mother told me to be a pillow cover. And I could...
It did remind me a bit of Noah and Nelly,
Yeah.
because they do that sort
Yeah.
of thing. But it's like Noah and Nelly with a big budget.
Yes.
But there was a load of weird animation around this sort of
What
late
I-
70s period.
And what I love about it is unapologetic.
Yeah.
It's just, there's like Ludwig,
Yeah.
the kids, there's an egg that comes down and plays classical music to you. Yeah, well, whatever, do.
But you're absolutely thrown into these worlds.
You are.
And they are very, very complex. And I was sort of blinking a bit, going, "This is I'm actually having to concentrate here to work out what the hell is going on."
And there's I think quite rightly there's no explanation. I mean, he brings out his pocket watch. It's got a little face, and hello, doctor. And of course, one of the major voices in it.
Yeah.
There's Peter Ustinov, who's of course the big scoop. So I think a guy called Jeffrey O'Kelly, who I think by all accounts was an actor, he came up with the idea of Snuggles in the early 70s. And wrote a poem about, Dr. Snuggles' Guide to a Better Life, in a hippie sort of way. And he got the various parts interested in, and I think the artwork was done in the Netherlands.
That's right, yeah.
And you've got Peter Ustinov as Dr. Snuggles and some of the other characters. I think there's also, it's really batshit crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, there's this camel called Woogie who sort of sounds a bit like Kenneth Williams on a bender, and he's in the sky and he sits amongst the clouds, and he has these sheep that they're called the lavender sheep that sort of cavort around, and Dr. Snuggles has tea with him. And I think with the water one where everything disappears, one of his humps collapses because there's not enough water, and so it can be quite dark at times. I'm fairly certain that's Ustinov.
Yeah.
But John Challis, very prolific.
This was
actor.
news to me. We met John quite a few times, but he never mentioned it.
I mean, it's just it's a case of Spot the Chalice character, and he's obviously having a lot of fun with it. Ali and I saw him at his one-man show. You went to that.
We went to that a few times. Yeah.
Ali, who remembers Snuggles a bit better than I do. My main memory of it was watch it.
Yes,
so we had a lot
how you say
when
that.
we were preparing the article. We had some naughty variations on that. Go figure. And it was part of that sort of what is now CBs. This is your children's programs. And Dr. Snuggles was sort of, I think, debuted in about 1980 when I was at secondary school and had lots of kind of homework, and so it was on. And I remember the opening music of Dr. Snuggles' Friend of the Animal World and everything, the general gist of it. But I don't think I ever watched an episode. I think I must have watched an episode, but I don't remember any episodes. And then in the mid-noughties, one of our many raids to either HMV or Virgin, Ali and I came across Dr. Snuggles. I'm quite interested. Oh, that's right. And Ali was hooked because she's a lot young. She's 6 years younger than me, so she would watch it avidly. And we bought the box set, and I kind of thought, okay, let's see what it's all about. And I was really, really impressed. It's nice production values. And these wonderful characters, everything comes to life before your eyes, with no explanation. And it's Spot the Chalice character. There's a sort of bird that delivers his post, which sounds just like John Pertwee doing a Cockney accent. Sort of, you're the Nargad grass, Thomas, aren't you? Oh, cool, blimey, Gav, kind of. Oh, it's total Pertwee. And there's the most revealing one, I think, is a gangster fox called Willie Fox, has this rat thing. And basically I would say that was John Challis doing a cross between James Cagney and Humphrey Bogart. Because every time the rat does something wrong, he goes, "Oh, you crummy rat." And it goes, which is almost Hagney's "you dirty rat," which he never said anyway, but there's a popular myth that he said "you dirty rat." But and he's having a ball. And in this one-man show, Ali asked him about it, and he said yes. And I heard about who else was involved, and I said, "Oh, great! I'll get to work with Peter Ustinov." And only to discover that Peter Ustinov recorded all his bits in advance whilst making a film abroad, so he never got to work with Peter Ustinov. There's also a woman in it called
Olwyn Griffiths.
Olwyn Griffiths. And I googled her, and she's actually more Ustonoff's age than John Challis.
Yeah.
So.
She's a lot to do with Postgate. So she's in Ivor the Engine.
Oh wow!
A lot of voices for that.
I imagine she was pretty established.
She's also the voice of Mrs. Pogle in Pogle's Wood.
But everyone's having a lot of fun with the characterisation, and definitely it's spot the who does what. Goodness knows who does Nobby Mouse, because even I can do Nobby Mouse.
Was it you? It wasn't you, was it?
No. My voice hadn't broken in 1979, but no. There's a wonderfully mastery character called Professor Emerald, who has this long cloak and glasses and a distinguished it's sort of more Jacoby master, and he and his monkey assistant can inexplicably turn themselves into vultures if they want to spy on people, and he's got this wonderful voice. And I'm fairly certain that's a plumbed up John Challis.
What was the one that you didn't like, Lisa? You said it was too deep. Was that the Badger?
Oh, the Badger. Yeah.
Oh yes, Dennis Badger. Yes, I can't work out whether that's Challis or Ustinov.
Because it almost sounds like it's slowed down, doesn't
Yeah.
it?
It does.
It's
I have
very
a
deep
bit of a thing
register.
about men with very deep voices, because there used to be a tannoy at work that was somebody with a deep voice, and if you were down an aisle it sounded like there was somebody behind you whispering in your ear. So I find it a bit creepy.
There was a hilarious, I mean this is going off the tangent a bit, but our friend Andy, whenever I used to go and visit him in Rickmansworth, and it used to be the train to Amersham, and there was an amusingly deep and very bored voice. This is a fast train to Amersham.
Imagine what the slow train's like.
This is a slow train to Amersham. Unbelievable. But I mean, there's Dennis the Badger, who's basically dresses a bit like Lenny from not in Sickness and in Health. What's the thing? In Mice and Men. That's right. And
There is a difference.
and he's a sort of, you think he's going to be the Gan of Blake Seven of
He's got a limiter in his head to stop him killing.
But he sounds stupid. But Snuggles always get him to do the initial designs for all his machines, so he must have some qualification. Yeah. It's difficult to know where to begin with these characters. They just go on and on.
Can I just jump in and say
please do.
This thing about Douglas Adams, and sort of writers always write about the things they're interested in. The thing about the birds in the cages reminds me of again from Neil Gaiman's book. Douglas has got a series of wildlife expeditions planned for 1987 to hunt down elusive birds, beasts and things, such as the kakapo. Have you ever heard of the kakapo? Well, the kakapo was a large flightless parrot whose major pastimes are sunbathing, parachuting and avoiding other kakapos.
I mean, yeah, so you've got the... I think the basic idea and the basic story was done by Geoffrey O'Kelly, who was the governor. But you can tell that Douglas is totally on board with all these things.
And it's Douglas's really productive period, isn't it? That how much did he do in 1979, for God's sake?
I mean, God bless him. You can see how he burned himself out, because 79 he was script editing Doctor Who. Yeah. He was writing the second series of Hitchhiker. He was novelising the first series of Hitchhiker. He was adapting Hitchhiker for the first series of Hitchhiker for the
There's the record.
Yeah. And probably collaborated with Ken Campbell on the 1979 stage show. And
did the man never sleep?
He's on amphetamines, and Snuggles, which was, sort of all put together in 79. I mean, there is a man dedicated to his work. I mean, I think maybe it's because, he was starting to get the work. They think, right, hot dog, here we go, as Ernest Borgnine would say. But I think
such a huge amount of output for 1 year.
I envy him, really. I would really love to be that prolific. I mean, I'm nowhere near as young as Dougie was when he did that, but no, it's totally sold in with his ecology issues, but done in a way that he would like lightheartedly. Yeah. And he got a teapot in space that sort of cries because I've lost all the other tea stuff and everything, and it's all Snuggles takes everything very seriously about pulling things together, and he can be on the most vital mission, and there's a crying monster or something that nobody loves, and he stops to help them. There's
this thing like a Loch Ness monster in the water episode.
That's right. They go to some, I forget the detail, but they go to some island, and they say, oh, you're in league with the, I think is it a roller coaster monster or something like that,
because they can't call it the Loch Ness monster because of copyright, I suppose.
Yes. Lost Next Monster would sue them. Yes. Wonderful. But yeah,
it's got sort of hair. Its hair is all awry.
Absolutely.
And then they comb its hair.
That's
and
right. Basically they
titivate it so it looks nicer.
That's right. And they kind of it's not scary after all. It just wants to make fun. Why wouldn't anyone talk? And he's got the sort of very kind of upper class voice, and they comb it down, and again he can take them the half the way, but only half the way because his mother's expecting him home for tea, and it all goes back to tea.
Yeah.
But it's this wonderful way, and this is why Douglas Adams, I think, has survived, is because he knows how to take the absolutely extraordinary and yet sort of turn it on its head with a prosaic twist. And Snuggles it's just a pitch perfect vehicle for him.
Yeah,
because that one's got the Sand King. That's the island they go.
That's right. That's Sand
King.
And
he's doing his Hercule Poirot voice. For that.
Oh yeah, it was.
Well, not quite, but he's doing a sort of French accent.
Yeah,
it's very close to his Hercule Poirot.
Yeah,
but Richard Carpenter draws from The Wizard of Oz in one episode with Matilda Junkbottom as the robot helper that helps Miss Nettles with his work. Why isn't she working? I know, she needs a heart. And of course it's all very much Tim.
Oh right, of course.
What can be a heart? And they ask the watch. No way. And there's this lazy alarm clock. Basically, there's the alarm clock that can't be bothered to work very much, and they spend half the episode chasing around after this alarm clock because he doesn't want to be a heart, and they win him round about being a heart, And as I say, it draws from the best, but it never shows to be derivative.
I have to take issue with some of his methods of transport. Okay, he's got a wooden spaceship, that's fine, that's quite Wallace and Gromit. He has got this pogo stick stroke umbrella thing, which I watch him and I think, wouldn't it be just easier to walk? Because you were complaining, Lisa, that all his animal friends have to run to keep up with him.
Yeah.
That's right. That's very true, actually. And also, if you listen very carefully to the voices of all the things he uses day in, day out, his pocket watch, his pogo stick with the duck
yes,
face,
sort of umbrella,
and in particularly Rickety Rick, the shed which he creates all his things in. They're all very lugubrious voices that are fed up with him. Get up there. It's not there, Doctor. No, that's the umbrella, and they've got. And they're all and Rickety Rick. Oh, what is it? It's Marvin as a shed. Basically.
I think he means well, but my God, he'd be a nightmare to live with, wouldn't he?
Well, he clearly is, because Miss Hudson. I'm identifying the character so much. Miss Nettles resigns regularly, so much so that she's got her own machine to resign in. The sort of give notice machine, which part of which looks. That's the thing he was saying. He's not quite what he seems. There's a part of the machine that goes across her head like a plate, which suggests indoctrination.
So a bit of mind thing going on there.
I think. I don't think she returns entirely willingly. There's a sinister side to Dr. Snuggles that's very, very subtle. Starting with a wink, as you say.
Yeah.
And
never trust a man who winks in his title
sequence.
I know.
Sorry, Sylvester. but yeah, so he's appallingly benevolent to the point where he ignores sort of murder of trees. Particularly telling is that there is a later episode where he says, where am I going to make for a boat? I can't cut down my tree friends. I thought, but you're quite prepared to see one of them murdered in front of you. Inconsistent.
Let someone else do it, and then it's not your fault.
So and also he's quite prepared to let his friends, his inanimate objects and his animal friends, change their lifestyle. You know, I mean, Rickety Rick in one episode turns himself upside down, takes his sides off, and becomes a boat. and basically, the wonderful line saying, "I've done what I can. The rest is up to you." Not the sort of line you give a shed every day. I thought, yeah, that's Snuggles in a nutshell. They're just having a lot of fun with it.
Well, I mean, thank you for suggesting it, because I, as I said, until yesterday, I'd never seen an episode, and then we did two in a row, and it was an experience. I'll have to say that it wasn't what I was expecting. It was a lot more complex.
That's exactly my reaction when Ali bought the DVDs in the noughties. That was exactly my reaction. I thought to myself, I was expecting a slightly twee cast.
Because the name put me off a bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd like to, before we wrap up though, I'd like to talk about the music.
Oh yes.
Ali and I have been saying we would very much like to see a musical release of the Snuggles bit, because it's so varied. You've got the sort of getting into the story, which is a variation of the theme, you know, and you've got Mrs. Neff's theme, which is like an a cappella kind of almost Derek Griffiths-y kind of, and you've got Matilda Junkbottom, which is a sort of like an electronic waltz, and the sort of menacing sort of, and whenever his baddies turn up, kind of, you know, but no, I would welcome a Snuggles musical release. Just a few more things on the cat. Dreamy Boom Boom, which is his rather wooden spaceship, runs on an old-fashioned lavatory chain, which is pulled at regular intervals by Nobby too early and involves smashing the machine. If the episode's underrunning, get Nobby to fuck everything up.
I can believe that.
To mess everything up. It becomes a regular thing. The other thing is there's a character called Granny Toots, who's this little old lady with a knitted thing, and she looks after lots and lots of cats, including one called the Cosmic Cat, which is basically...
the Cosmic Cat. What was all that about?
That's basically just the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland.
It is
exactly what it looked like.
Yeah.
It's a space-age version of the Cheshire Cat.
Yeah.
And there's an episode, and because unfortunately DVDs aren't sort of, this is number one, this is number two. So you're watching all out of order. So Matilda Junkbottom is sweeping up things and taking for granted, and then they're inventing in the next episode. Yeah, with Granny Toots, you've got basically another old friend of Snuggles, and she's looking after all these cats, and the Cosmic Cat basically comes down in the spaceship and teach me how to lead. And I'm fairly certain that's Ustinov. But he seems to be ever lumbered with cats, because in Logan's Run he's plays the old man that's left as part of the only person in civilization.
Long time since I've seen that. Yeah.
And he's in an old, what's left of the White House, which totally overrun with ivy, but looking after tons and tons of cats. And the Cosmic Cat is basically, it's the Cheshire Cat with a sort of antennae, you know.
It's got electricity sparking between.
If they want something from the unknown and space that they're not quite sure about, they always call it the Cosmic Cat. And basically, it's there's a meow, just in case you've forgotten he's a cat, you know. Even though it's, he's a fun character, and again, unapologetically inventive. It's just so much to look at. An unexpected joy, and I think I don't know. We commissioned this article last time I came round, and I can't remember whose idea was it.
I don't know.
I honestly can't remember, but certainly something that I thought was rather twee in the early 80s became a revelation.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you sort of remember these things from sort of childhood, and you go back to them and go, "Oh, that's a bit thin."
Yeah,
but there was, as I said, there was a lot going on here. But then I have no memory of it.
Yes.
So
it's moralised. It immoralises, but at the same way, it sidesteps the moralisation by just being totally innocent.
Yeah.
You know, kind of. Oh well, that wouldn't do, would it? You know, sort of. Oh, he's about to eat an apple, and this worm comes up saying, "Don't eat my house." oh yeah, no, I'm sorry, I'm terribly sorry. And he's totally British as well.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I like the way he says, "I'm Dr. Snuggles from
Earth. Yes, he
Yeah.
always says that.
He doesn't say, I'm from England.
Yes.
He goes, I'm from Earth.
And I think the first episode they go, there's something to do with plants, and they go to Plant Planet, where everything's run by plants.
But yeah, lovely little series, and
Yeah.
thank you for suggesting it.
My absolute pleasure.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Nick.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Many thanks to Nick for
Yes.
joining us to do that.
Thank you, Nick. It was lovely to see him.
Indeed.
Yes.
And we should say also thanks to Paul Chandler, who was
Yeah.
there,
Yes.
but kept quiet
He did.
throughout the
He
article.
did. Yes. He just listened.
But he was there for moral support,
He
wasn't
was.
he?
Yes.
We recorded that a while ago now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And amazingly, we've got one extra thing of Dr. Snuggles stuff
Yes.
has come to light
Yes.
since then.
Yeah.
For the new book edited by Kevin Davies about Douglas Adams,
Yeah.
42, The Wildly Improbable Ideas of Douglas Adams,
Mm-hmm.
amazingly has a little bit of Dr. Snuggles in it.
Yes.
As in Douglas Adams's archive was found a storyline for Dr. Snuggles and the Peanut Solving Machine by Douglas Adams and John Lloyd. Part 1, The Kitchen. Dr. Snuggles is talking to Miss Nettles about the forthcoming birthday for 8 of the mice. Miss Nettles is preparing 8 birthday cakes. Nobby listens. And probably it all goes downhill at the moment Nobby's involved,
Yes.
doesn't it?
Yes.
But that's lovely to see. And that's an excellent book, isn't it?
It is. It's a bit hefty,
By
but
Kevin, and we had to plug it because
Yes.
he's plugged us in
He
Hitchhiker's
has.
circles,
He
hasn't he?
has, yes.
So that's lovely.
yes.
But now here's Martin to talk about.
The Waltons.
As I look back fondly on those times when we used to gather round our rented television set and occasionally watch shows as a family, I can remember the dismay and heartbreak when it was one of my mother's favourites that we had to watch, even though, in later times, that same show would become as fixed in my own life as it had once been in hers. As a television show, The Waltons has become something of a benchmark for the kind of kitsch, cheesy wholesomeness that has rather gone out of fashion in these more cynical and brutal times that we now find ourselves living in. Nowadays, in the wider public consciousness at least, the series seems to be reduced to a few skits about its iconic "Good night everybody" signature episode endings, usually accompanied by some barbed reference to that outtake about Christmas balls that used to pop up on the sort of shows that made cheap laughs out of such things. But, as I've found recently, there's a lot more to the Waltons than this. Set, at least initially, during the Depression era in 1930s America, on one level, The Waltons tells the story of an ordinary, God-fearing American family who are, of course, far from ordinary at all, and does so with a certain amount of heartwarming optimism about the human spirit that is completely designed to make you feel a little better about life in general and restore your faith in humanity as the end credits roll. Inspired by the novel Spencer's Mountain by Earl Hamner Jr., which was in itself a fictionalised account of his own youth spent growing up in Virginia, and featuring an iconic theme tune written by Jerry Goldsmith, The Waltons tells weekly stories about a large, impoverished family surviving with little but themselves to rely on in an idealised and mutually supportive rural community. And whilst the stories tend towards the uplifting and occasionally the unbelievable, this is a series which has its heart very much in a good place, even if in some parts of the modern political map it has come to represent a lost world of some forgotten ideals and the sort of lifestyles that certain sectors of modern society might still want to aspire towards bringing back. There was once a speech made by President George Bush about making the American family a lot more like the Waltons and a lot less like the Simpsons, which made headlines at the time, but which didn't age well, especially as the Simpsons, it turned out, were exactly the kind of suburban family much of America actually closely resembled. But that speech did stir up a lot of comment and ill feeling, and triggered the same kind of thinking that tries to push our own culture back to some rose-tinted ideal of a country as portrayed in 50s film and television, which probably never really existed, but certainly appeals to those who like to think it did. Because, let's be honest right from the start here, the Waltons are a white American family, and whilst they might be living in hard times, they still have a lot of advantages that other people living through those times might not have had. They seem to own Waltons Mountain, a large area of land which supplies them with enough timber to run their own sawmill and lumber business, and supply their community with a commodity that was still much in demand even during those lean times. They're able to run a vehicle, feed animals, buy radios, and put food on the table of that large house that they all live in. This is a household consisting of 7 children, as well as their grandparents, and whilst viewers seem to accept that they work very hard to achieve all of that, and there are several obstacles put in their way over the series, this is probably not the typical experience of most American families during those difficult years. The Waltons ran for 221 episodes across 9 full seasons on CBS between 1972 and 1981, and was, as is later stated prominently on the title card of the episodes, a Lorimar production, who would later be responsible for bringing us a completely different kind of family saga in the form of Dallas, which started its run in 1978, and even after cancellation, the series refused to disappear completely, with half a dozen made-for-TV movies popping up on television every so often for a further 15 years after the series ended. As part of my recent quest to try and re-examine some of the supposedly cheesier elements of the television archive, I picked up a copy of the first season of The Waltons on DVD in a charity shop, fully expecting to find it to be sickly sweet and risible. And yet, when I started watching a couple of episodes, I found that for a lot of the time, it was actually an incredibly compelling drama series with some astonishingly good performances and some seriously enjoyable storytelling week after week after week. It's not perfect, of course, because the weekly grind of television production of 25 stories every 52 weeks cannot hope to reach the heights of greatness all of the time, but The Waltons does actually have quite a high hit rate for good, solid, satisfyingly thought-provoking episodes. I shouldn't have been surprised by this, of course, because one of the reasons why I was drawn to that set in the first place was a fond memory of settling down on Sunday mornings and enjoying the reruns that were shown on Channel 4 during the 1990s, and reminding myself that back then I may have come to mock, but found that I was sticking around just to see how the stories unfolded each week. I don't think that I'm alone in that. During those pre-multi-channel years, those weekly viewing habits and rituals were simply part of life for a lot of us, and shows like this, shown in unusual time slots years after they had ceased production, found entire new generations to charm. And there is something enjoyable in watching a TV show in which goodness and kindness is celebrated, especially when you watch as much American television as I do. It really is something of a novelty to be watching a show in which the characters are not pointing guns at each other all the time, or screeching around corners in expensive motor vehicles, or becoming involved in drug rackets in the name of entertainment, and aren't all out to get one over on their fellow humans as much and as often as they can. Strangely enough, the opening episode, The Foundling, actually does feature a car chase of sorts, although that episode is one in which a deaf child is abandoned pretty much on the Waltons' doorstep, taking us immediately into the area of the kind of issues-based stories that the show would become well known for dealing with sensitively. And because this is an American drama series, guns would feature occasionally, as it seems that they eventually must in almost all such shows, no matter how wholesome they may aim to be. But at least their first appearance was 4 episodes in, during an episode where the men actually go off hunting in a time when doing such a thing might actually put food onto their tables, which at least does slightly justify their presence. Naturally, it is made perfectly clear that John Boy, despite the heroic conclusion to the episode, is a reluctant gun-toter, and this possibly helps to reveal the more liberal underlying themes of liberty, inclusiveness, tolerance and understanding that the series as a whole, perhaps because of the political leanings of some of its writers and performers, does its best to promote. During that episode, unsurprisingly called The Hunt, in one of the many unexpected turns the series makes, John Walton Sr. is, perhaps incredibly, actually attacked by a bear. He survives, of course, but the stuntman makes the attack look pretty ferocious, to be honest. There are criticisms of the series, of course. You don't get to see anything other than a white face until that 4th episode, and whilst that particular actor, Teddy Wilson, is seen as being as much a part of the friendly Waltons mountain community as anyone else, and is one of those close friends making up the hunting party, it takes until the appearance of Lynn Hamilton playing the African-American semi-regular character Verdie Grant in an episode called The Scholar towards the end of that first season, before the very different kinds of hardships that non-white people might have been struggling with are even mentioned. But this series is primarily the story of the Waltons family and their interactions with the world, as, for good or ill, it rolls up, in that way it will, on the doorstep of that big old house in Virginia. Some of the stories do take place, at least in part, over at another nearby house owned by the Baldwin sisters, and several plot points involve visits to the schoolhouse, other neighbours' homes, and Ike Godsey's general mercantile store, which basically appears to be the only shop in the entire county and serves as the hub for much of what goes on in the community, even serving as a makeshift schoolhouse when the original is burned to the ground in one episode, actually by Richard Bradford, the man in a suitcase himself. Events in many stories take place on the highways and byways of Jefferson County, and there are occasional visits to the buzzing metropolis of Charlottesville, which, despite fairy tale mentions of exciting faraway places like New York or California, seems to be as big as the ambitions of the Waltons and their friends sometimes get. But it is to the hearth and home of the Waltons themselves that most of the stories take us, and with 3 generations, 2 pairs of adults living alongside 7 children, one of whom is an aspiring and admittedly talented writer, and the dog Reckless, all having various adventures, trials and tribulations, there are plenty of stories to be told, especially as that road through their little town does seem to be a magnet for drawing in all sorts of unlikely visitors in that way that possibly only the imaginations of writers working on a television series can. But the series itself is solid enough and tells stories across that first year that showcase all of the family to a lesser or greater extent, each getting their own moments to shine, even if they must sometimes have wondered whether their character was getting forgotten about in all of the melee. The original title sequence, which introduces viewers to the family as well as the show, is a story in itself, although it was replaced in subsequent seasons with perhaps the more familiar sepia-tinted photographs version. The camera flies across the colourful and admittedly beautiful Virginia landscape before settling upon that now iconic house and entering through an upstairs window in which the series star Richard Thomas, who plays John Boy Walton, is busily and earnestly working upon his journal. He's interrupted at this labour of love by the honking of a truck's horn as his returning father and co-star Ralph Waite, as John Walton, drives up towards the house from where Miss Michael Learned, playing his mother Olivia Walton, emerges looking, as she often will, slightly concerned. We ought to pause awkwardly here, much as these co-stars have to in order for their name captions to appear, because we have to recognise that qualifier on Michael Learned's name. Adding the Miss was deemed necessary because her name was very much thought of as being a male name, even though the world was full of male Leslies and Shirleys and Marians and even a boy named Sue. It was felt that audiences, rather surprisingly, might be confused by this, and the credit was adjusted accordingly. Maybe they were worried about the typesetters on the TV guides constantly phoning the production offices to check. Who knows? It took until Series 6 and the departure of the supposed lead character Richard Thomas, happily concluding his 5-year contract, for the producers to finally feel confident enough to drop the Miss, and several decades more for Star Trek Discovery to give a major female character the same name. Learned herself would depart the series as a regular after Series 7 of 9, although she did make occasional guest appearances and turned up in at least some of the reunion movies, and seems to have become very much more at peace with her part in the series in recent times. Meanwhile, back to those opening titles, and John Walton, presumably because such a scene might be set in earlier, less difficult times, is returning home with a big wooden radio set bought, we assume, for the family home, and so we must also assume this to have been a huge and significant event in the Walton family at the time. At this point, we are also introduced to Ellen Corby, who plays the grandmother, although that is not stated, and neither is her preferred title, and the cheeky avuncular figure of Will Geer as the grandfather, wickedly grinning at this development in the household's possessions. And then, unbilled, most of the children gather from various corners of the house and garden to greet the arrival of what seemed to be this most exciting new technology, as indeed it must have been in the early 1930s, as it is lugged towards the front porch of the family homestead. The youngest child, still uncredited, dashes from wherever she has been enjoying herself to find out what she is missing out on, and as she joins the rest of the family, is scooped up into the arms of John Boy as they are delightfully framed as if posing for a family picture for some unseen photographer, and indeed within the space of a few episodes, that final freeze frame would magically transform into a framed picture hanging on some long-lost parlour wall, as the viewers have been, rather cleverly, introduced to the entire setup of the show in a very simple yet effective way. For the record, those 7 children were, in order of age if not importance, John Boy, as I have already mentioned, and next in order we find the musically talented second son Ben, played by John Walmsley, who seems desperate to be allowed to grow up and possibly supplant his older brother in terms of importance, private bedroom and influence around the family dinner table, but sometimes all that he manages is to simply prove to the family that he is not yet old enough to be trusted with such responsibilities, so on occasion his sole function seems to be to show off how unlike the mature, responsible John Boy he is, and get blamed for trying too hard to grow up. That said, when in The Legend, an old military buddy of John Sr. turns up, he rather maturely takes the blame for a fire which he is blamed for, so maybe he's actually already a lot more grown up than they give him credit for. Third up is the 13-year-old dreamer Mary Ellen, as played by Judy Norton, who, at least at the start of the series, has a rebellious streak and a tomboyish approach to life and wants nothing more than to get away from this dull-seeming rural backwater and escape into the big wide world, preferably without lumbering herself with the responsibilities that come with family life and homemaking. This can often make her seem at odds with her mother, who generally seems to be entirely satisfied that her own life is precisely that. Interestingly, Mary Ellen has a desperate need to be important and dreams of being rich and beautiful, and yet in the apple-picking to a deadline storyline of The Minstrel, she tries to run off, at 13, with a wandering musician rather than stay to help out the family during a crisis. The family forgive her, of course they do, and later, during the crisis of The Deed, during which it genuinely seems as if the family might lose everything, she redeems herself by selling a prized possession, although her needy whine of, "And I helped out a lot, didn't I, Daddy?" does tell us a lot about her character in the space of just one line. Erin is the second daughter, middle child, and sometimes seems to be all but lost in the crowd when it comes to distinguishing personality traits. Earnestly played by future novelist and filmmaker Mary Elizabeth McDonough, her main episode in the first year is The Scholar, in which she gets ill but rather enjoys both the attention this brings along with it and the opportunity to not be just one of the crowd for a while. It is these middle children that I most feel sorry for, and at least at first, they are the ones which most seem to struggle to seem relevant or even present in many of the family scenes. The one who suffers most, I feel, is Ben, as played by Eric Scott, whose main storyline in the first season, during the episode The Star, seems to be when he is desperate to make an impact when all of the other children appear to have won the various awards, rosettes and cups that churches and schools tend to hand out to children for being the best at whatever it is that they are celebrating that week. Somehow Ben seems always destined to be second best and forgotten about, not least in The Star, when his sheer desperation to win the spelling bee almost leaps out of the TV set, and you can almost feel the actor's similar pain when week after week he seems to be just making up the numbers and trying to find a line to speak in order to justify even being there. You spot him from time to time, fizzing with suppressed excitement, trying to hold in that desire to have something else to do and show off his acting skills, but at least in that first year he does seem rather too keen, too eager and far too underused. Next up is Jim Bob, played by David W. Harper, who at least has the advantage of being cute. Despite not being the youngest, he is the youngest of the boys and somehow gives off an effortless charm that I'm assuming is lost a little as he ages in the series, but he definitely gets some rare and enjoyable character moments, especially when playing opposite Will Geer. Despite sometimes being shirtless under those ubiquitous dungarees that most of the family seem to wear most of the time, he gets some fine character moments, including some nice subplots like hatching a duck egg under his armpit in the episode The Townie. You can almost feel the suppressed frustration of some of the other kids as he steals the scenes from right under their freckled noses. Every single time. The youngest child, the baby, and sometimes the neediest of them all, is Elizabeth, as played by Kami Cotler, who does get that special featured place in the title sequence, remember, but generally spends most of her time doing kid stuff, sometimes alongside Jim Bob, and is generally there for the oh how sweet moments that seep into almost every television show featuring young children in the often mistaken belief that viewers will somehow find them terribly charming and endearing. She also serves as comic relief, in that she gets to say the comic payoff line in the meal sequences or in the candy store, in that kids say the funniest things way that can sometimes make your teeth itch, but she's also there for the false jeopardy of nearly getting flattened by a car in The Townie or getting locked in a box in an abandoned house in the opening episode The Foundling. By rights she should be completely dead in that first episode, of course, and in the real world she probably would have been, but this is the Waltons, so she is rescued thanks to the misunderstood deaf girl, and everything turns out fine in the end, and we learn a little bit about the prejudice deaf people suffer too. Even the youngest of these children is, at time of writing, in their late 50s, which is quite a shocking thing to realise, but we have to consider that at over 50 years old, the show itself was made at a time closer to the period setting that it is recreating 40 years after the fact than to where we are now. Incidentally, almost the entire family are red of hair, which presumably explains most of the casting choices, and have a kind of too good to be trueness about them, which sometimes seemed grating when I was watching as a child, and my mother would look across the room disapprovingly, and I would find myself wondering if she wished that I was more like those lovely children on the television. But naturally, of all of the Walton children, it is inevitably the series' star character of John Boy that gets most of the story time and attention, because the series is built around his character, for at least the first 5 seasons. That name, John Boy, incidentally, is simply local terminology for John Walton Jr., by the way, but I don't suppose I really needed to tell you that. Over the course of just that first season, brimful of the kind of basic human decency that sometimes causes the more cynical amongst us to roll their eyes in sheer disbelief, he is very much the moral core of the show, sometimes even more so than his parents. For whilst John Walton is a fundamentally decent chap, he does have his flaws and remains something of a pragmatist, despite his much feared word being the rule of law in his family's home. He is, however, a hugely reasonable man and probably not to be feared at all, but the children do not like to cross him, and when he comes into conflict with John Boy, you know things are really very serious indeed. John Boy is still a confused schoolboy during this first run. We are aware that he is a naturally gifted and talented writer with places to go, but not yet, but he seems to be still very naive in the ways of the world, and in matters of love, and even how to make telephone calls down at Ike's store. So, across that first season, we share in his experiences of growing up, sometimes frustrated, in the tiny backwater of Waltons Mountain, whilst dreaming big dreams of somehow becoming a successful writer one day. Obviously, the conceit of the series is that he will eventually become a successful writer because we have the show to watch, but along the way to that seemingly impossible life goal, he is often willing to sacrifice his own plans in the name of honour, justice and decency. At one point, he borrows an ancient typewriter from the Baldwin sisters in order to send some of his writing to a New York magazine, and is horrified when Mary Ellen sells it to a passing junk trader. Mary Ellen moves heaven and earth to retrieve it, but it is John Boy who is wise enough in the ways of the literary world at least to recognise a rejection letter when he gets one, despite that New York City postmark getting the whole brood into an excited tizzy. Despite having little in the way of possessions, John Boy does possess a very welcoming sense of fairness. It is he who invites almost everyone he meets, from the wandering minstrel to the much-loathed group of gypsies, into the family home in their times of need, as well as the abandoned movie star who is, like the circus troupe and the literary man, one of the many unexpected people who just happen to turn up in this tiny dot on the map in the very back of Beyond. He's not above throwing himself into the fray when necessary either. Fisticuffs ensue in both The Boy from the CCC and with the darker side of the extended Waltons family in The Dust Bowl Cousins. And when he is robbed during his experience-expanding money-making move to the big city of Wheeling to earn money to help the family save their livelihood in The Deed, he throws himself into a fight with the hoodlums that robbed him and is well rewarded for his efforts. Actually, The Deed is a bit of a rite of passage for John Boy all round. Several times his awkwardness around the girls he likes lead to unhappy outcomes. But here he gets kissed by a girl who shows him several kindnesses because he's basically a good person, and he transforms from the awkward boy seeking permission to eat his sandwiches in his room and wonders whether or not to add a 2-cent roll to his 5-cent soup in a bar, to the confident young man able to contribute his $50 reward money into the family fund needed to pay for a solicitor to prove ownership of their land. And in a world where $200 represents absolutely everything that the family can possibly scrape together, $1 is the kind of sum that children can only dream of saving up for, and $2 to pay a doctor to save a child's life has to be scraped around for, he is still prepared to do extra work simply to save up and buy his mother a washing machine to relieve her of some of life's burdens. Although, as is often said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and his efforts to do good sometimes lead to misunderstandings when third parties interfere. So his mother rails against him helping the Baldwin sisters. A Jewish family fleeing Nazi Germany fear his attempts at friendship, and his sister betraying what she didn't realise was a secret leads to a brief falling out with Verdi Grant when she feels that she can no longer trust his word, despite John Boy's word being one of those things that you can definitely, utterly depend on, almost to the point of sickness. And in later years he would get a car and move away to take up his place at Boatwright University, and even be recast for a while, being played for 2 seasons and a couple of TV movies by Robert Whiteman. But it is Richard Thomas who is, inevitably, the actor most associated with the role, and he freely admits that Goodnight John Boy is likely to be the headline that announces his passing, whenever that should come to pass. Of course, it's unfair to suggest that any of the 6 other children lack screen time because of a lack of talent. There were simply so many of them that they couldn't all feature in main storylines all of the time, and I suppose child actor labour laws would have restricted just how much any of them were able to work on the show, at least until they got a little older, and later on significant cast departures would place others of them centre stage and allow them to make the most of their opportunities of being in the spotlight, even if remarkably few of them actually went on to having huge acting careers. Of the adults, it is probably Ralph Waite who went on to have the highest profile of the cast after the show ended, even though he didn't quite stick around to the very end of the regular series, as the last couple of seasons tended to focus more and more on the lives of the Walton children as they grew up. In a very diverse and politically active career, he appeared in shows as different as Carnivale and NCIS in his later years. Michael Learned, as I have already mentioned, left the show after the 7th season and was only 11 years older than the actor playing her oldest son. Once everyone accepted that she wasn't a man, she would leave the show in that 7th year and have a very successful television career despite being eternally identified as Olivia Walton. You'll even be able to spot her in 2022's Netflix drama about Jeffrey Dahmer, should you wish to watch it. The fascinating actor Will Geer, of course, didn't live to see the end of the series, dying as he did in 1978, 6 years into the run, but this part was the crowning glory of a long career, one which had been been severely curtailed by him being blacklisted for not naming names in the 1950s. Quite often, as with lots of other character actors of his generation, he turns up as a sinister villain in shows like Mission Impossible and The Invaders, and it sometimes seems strange to see lovable old Zebulon Walton being sinister and up to no good in those other shows. Ellen Corby was a well-known television face long before the Waltons came along to define her entire career and win her 3 Emmy Awards. Before the Waltons, she appears in just about every cowboy series ever made in one way or another, and even played Lurch's mother on The Addams Family. But it is as Grandma Walton that she is best and possibly most fondly remembered, despite the fact that she struggled to carry on in later seasons after suffering from a stroke during the 5th season, which severely reduced her screen time, and yet somehow she battled on to the end of the 8th season and was even able to appear in 5 of the 6 reunion movies. We see little of the extended community living around Walton's Mountain as recreated on a Warner Brothers studio set bordering onto the Los Angeles River during that first season, despite the schoolroom being full of the kind of wide-eyed young performers that Hollywood seems to churn out on a conveyor belt somehow. Guest stars who apparently live locally come and go in one-off appearances, but in the expanded universe surrounding Walton's Mountain, we do get regular appearances by the rather lovable Ike Godsey, the owner of that store, played with both grit and a determined twinkle by Joe Conley, and the aforementioned Baldwin sisters. They are a pair of spinster sisters living in a large house that is something of a shrine to their late father. Mamie Baldwin is played by Helen Klebe, and Emily is played by Mary Jackson, and whilst their nervous naivety is largely included in the series as comic relief, there is a tragedy to their lives that drives several key moments, and it is their continuing production of their late father's concoction known as The Recipe, basically unknowingly they are producing bootleg whiskey, that keeps people coming to their door. Their once vast, extended and idealised family is all but lost to time, but occasionally rogue elements turn up, and usually it's because they have some dark plans afoot for the family fortune, inevitably involving the recipe in some devious way. We are also introduced to the Reverend Matthew Fordwick, as played by John Ritter, the school teacher Miss Hunter, played by Marie-Claire Costello, who is one of John Boy's inspirational mentors who harbours high hopes for his future as a great American writer, and John Crawford as Sheriff Bridges, all of whom would make regular appearances on the show throughout its long run. Each show would open and close with a narration spoken in elderly, nostalgic and effortlessly avuncular tones by the series creator himself, Earl Hamner Jr., or Earl Boy, as we can only assume he was once known. Presumably, given the lines he gets to say, he is speaking as an older version of John Boy, but in a peculiar way he is also speaking as himself, as it is his own memories that the series is purporting to show to us. Earl Hamner Jr. was the oldest of 8 children, and his father's struggles during the Depression years inspired the 1970 novel The Homecoming, which inspired the TV movie and acted as a sort of pilot for the Waltons as a weekly television show. Alongside The Waltons, which is arguably his best known work, despite him also being the creator of Falcon Crest, Hamner is also credited as the writer of 8 episodes of The Twilight Zone during its original run in the 1960s, 6 novels, and has a whole host of credits as a writer for hire on series as diverse as The Invaders, Wagon Train and Gentle Ben. Of course, the entire series could have been very different if they had followed the model set by the 1971 pilot television movie The Homecoming: A Christmas Story, which was slightly recast when the series started. All the children that we recognise are present and correct, however, which probably shows off just how good all of them were and how well they worked together, and it is the adult roles that were mostly recast, with the exception of Ellen Corby, who obviously seemed perfect right from the off. The mother, father and grandfather are all played by other actors, Patricia Neal, Andrew Duggan and Edgar Bergen, and there's also an alternative sheriff, a completely different pair of Baldwin sisters, and an utterly transformed Ike, and it does feel oh so very different to the iconic television series it spawned, if you ever get a chance to see it. But it is that now rather iconic television series that I find myself drawn back to, and I was genuinely surprised at how much I enjoyed rewatching that first season after all this time, especially as, despite my 1990s experience of it, it was still living in my head as being a very kitschy creation that would bore me to tears. And yet, because of what we try to do on shows like this, since watching these episodes, I've looked into the history of the show a little bit more, and whilst I really couldn't see myself wanting to take in the entire 9-season saga of the Waltons family, plus those movies, I certainly think that I could handle seeing just a tiny bit more of it, perhaps up until the point that Grandpa dies. However, I'm sure that you will all know about how it can be with these old TV shows. You read a synopsis of an episode you've not yet seen, featuring characters that you've started to get to know, and you start to wonder how exactly it played out on screen, and the next thing you know, there's another section of your shelving crammed full of yet another long-running TV series you're trying to find the spare time to watch. But whilst I'm fully aware that later years of the show did have a tendency to transform into something more caricatured, schmaltzy, cheesy and hallmarky, and perhaps got a little too pleased with itself, Those early seasons set in the Depression years when the show was truly centred in what we still mostly think of it as being, family values and hopefulness, set in the depths of a time of poverty, made for some fascinating and well-structured storytelling and is well worth a look. I enjoyed my visit, and I hope that you do too. And so I find myself wondering again about a surprisingly wonderful television series, and looking back fondly upon those days when we used to gather in front of the family television set and follow its stories right up until those familiar voices would call out in the fading evening light. Good night, Lisa.
Good night, Martin.
Good night, Andrew.
Good night, Martin.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Many thanks to Martin for that.
Yes, thank you, Martin.
Martin's show Vision on Sound continues every Sunday at 7 o'clock on Fab Radio International.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also repeated on...
A Wednesday at 10 o'clock.
You're on it tonight as well.
I am.
Yeah.
I am.
Ooh, exciting. So you better listen to that one.
Yes.
But now, here's you and me looking at...
The Mind of Mr. J.G. Reader.
Good afternoon, Lisa.
Good afternoon, Andrew.
The Mind of Mr. J.G. Reader.
Yes.
How many years have we been planning to do The Mind of Mr. J.G. Reader?
Lots.
6 or 7?
Yes, something like that.
Basically,
yeah.
since we started,
Yes.
haven't we?
Yes, we've never got round to it until now.
We've never got round to it. Why have we never got round to it? Have we been almost scared of doing it?
Possibly, yeah.
Because we
Yeah.
love it so
We
much.
do love it, yes.
It's one of those shows that we discovered via network.
Yes.
Because I'd never heard of it. I
No.
assume you'd never
I
heard of
hadn't,
it.
no.
And by the end of the first episode, we knew we really, really liked it, didn't we?
Yes.
But explain, who is Mr. J.G. Reader and what is his mind?
Okay. Well, I suppose he's the assistant to the Director of Public Prosecutions, or Sir Jason Toovey, as he's known in the series. He's not actually given a name in the stories. He's just known as the DPP.
We should say from the off that this is the work of Edgar Wallace originally, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And Mr. Reader first appears in a story, and I almost don't want to give it away, where there is a Mr. Reader, but perhaps not the Mr. Reader you were expecting.
Yes.
In that there's a character who says he's Mr. Reader, but that's not all there is to it.
No,
I'm not going to say any more, because I would say track down the Mr. Reader stories and read them, haha.
Yeah.
But even Edgar Wallace, I think, realises that his first stab at Mr. Reader doesn't go the way that's the most interesting way.
No.
So for the rest of the short stories, we have the Mr. Reader that you see on television,
Yes.
basically.
He sort of does a rug pull, doesn't he? And changes
There's a
it
twist
completely.
in the tale. There's a twist.
Yes.
But yeah, Mr. Reader is mild-mannered, the word?
That's what they say.
Yeah.
But I think it's just a front he puts up.
Yeah.
Because behind it, he can be quite ruthless and quite determined and quite steely.
Well,
really.
it's the bit in the first episode where he suddenly draws a gun on John Bennett.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, hang on. And he's also got a sword sticky thing,
He has.
like Adam Adamant,
has,
isn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to give a quick run through of the series,
Yes.
but concentrate on one episode, The Investors.
Yes.
But it's 1969 and 1971,
Yeah.
2 series from Thames, 8 episodes per series.
Yes.
And Doctor Who fans may know Hugh Burden, who plays Mr. Reader,
Yes.
from Spearhead from Space,
Yes.
as Channing. And it's astonishingly different. The way he plays the two parts, isn't it?
Yes.
Channing is very, very cold and alien,
Yes.
and Mr. Reader is very precise.
Yeah.
But is he a bit scared of ladies, do you think?
I think he's respectful
Yeah.
and possibly a little bit scared of revealing his inner self
Yeah.
to ladies.
I mean, to me, he's the antimatter version of James Bond, isn't he?
Yeah.
And I think that's why I like Mr. Reader and I don't like James Bond, in that I can identify with one and not the other.
Yes.
But Mr. Reader has a fearsome housekeeper.
Yes.
In the ample form of Mrs. Hoochin.
Yeah, in the television series.
In the television series.
Books,
yeah.
He has a housekeeper, but she's quite dismissive of him, isn't she?
She's
like
hardly
him.
in it as well.
She's hardly in it, yeah. So
yeah.
they need someone to be sort of a foil for him, really, don't they? Somebody who's completely
she's always
different.
making him meals
That he doesn't
like liver and sheep's brains and calves' feet and all sorts of horrible things.
Yeah.
He never eats them.
No, he doesn't, no.
And sometimes he hides them in his briefcase, doesn't he?
He sticks them in his paper and gets rid of them. Yeah.
But the other lady in his life is Miss Bellman.
Yes, and he meets her quite early on, doesn't he? In the sort of second episode.
Yes, it's in the episode The Stealer of Marble.
Yes.
And he becomes involved. Well, not involved, but Miss Bellman sort of enters in on his world as he investigates where she's working. Because they see each other
on the train,
tube. Going to work, and she notices him and he notices her, but he's too shy to do anything
about it. Yeah.
Is she the one driving it, do you think, sometimes?
Possibly, though I think he's quite happy to carry on with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes she's the more active person. She quite likes him, I think. Even though he's considerably older than she is.
Yeah.
But yeah, she finds him interesting.
Yeah.
And intriguing.
And of course, she actually it occurs in 2 incarnations.
She does. Yes.
Yeah, as from series 1 to series 2, she regenerates off screen like Romana, doesn't she? So that's quite fun.
Yeah.
I have to say, I do prefer the first.
Yeah.
I was going to say Miss Marple.
No, not Miss Marple.
No, definitely not Miss Marple, is it? But yes, the first Miss Bellman is Virginia Stride. Best known from my point of view for Z Cars and Play School, I suppose.
Yeah.
And the second Miss Bellman is
Gillian Lewis.
And do we know her from much?
No. Can't say I've really seen her in anything else.
No.
But
you've got Willoughby Goddard as Sir Jason Tuvey.
Yes.
And you were saying, when does the name Jason come in?
Yes, because obviously, as I said, in the books, the Mr. Reader's boss is never named. Yeah. But I think they needed to give him a name.
I had a quick look, and there's a gov.uk site for names. And you can put a name in and it'll tell you its occurrence over time. And the name Jason doesn't really appear on the graph until about the mid-1960s.
Yeah.
And you wondered whether it was perhaps a nod to Jason King from Department S.
Yes.
But there's only a month or so difference between episode 1 of Department S reaching the air and episode 1 of Mr. Reader reaching the air. So it can't be that.
No.
The other explanation is possibly Jason and the Argonauts. I don't know.
Yeah, I just think. I mean,
that's 63, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure who the sort of creator of the series is. I guess it's probably Kim Mills.
Yeah, but Kim Mills produces series 1 and also directs some of it.
I think he's probably just pulled a name. Maybe he thought Jason is a good classical name.
I'm not sure about that.
I don't know.
Windsor Davies also pops up a few times.
Yes, Windsor Davies is a regular in series 2, isn't he? He's by far, because Mr. Reader works with various different policemen.
Yeah.
Windsor Davies he works with 4 times, which is a lot more than most of the others. So.
But it's 1920s, isn't it?
Yes.
So it's that sort of flapper era, isn't it? Is that the term?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of sort of villains in sort of big hats and things like that, isn't there?
Yes.
So and they've all got quite good names as well. You've got Harry Taube in there, isn't he?
Yes.
Was it Lou Cassio?
Yeah.
You've got Joe Melia as Mo Liskey.
Yes.
I always like that name. Colin Baker briefly turns up.
He does.
He's not a villain.
He's not a villain. He's very early on in his career, so he's quite young still. So,
but you've got a lot of familiar names.
Yes.
You've got John Ringham. You've got David Collins, trying to be Chinese at one point.
That's a bit embarrassing.
That's not great.
No.
John Bennett, Ken Campbell.
Yeah.
Amanda Barry's in there, isn't she?
Yes,
Because you've got some TV Timeses.
Yes.
that you managed to track down,
Mm-hmm.
and Amanda Barry's on the cover in flapper costume,
Yes.
isn't she?
Yes, which
And
is the part she's
isn't she
playing.
gone to the races with Hugh Burden?
With Hugh Burden, yes.
There are some photos. We'll show this when we do the video.
Yeah.
But she's also a flapper in something else that night, isn't she? Isn't it?
That week, I
That
think.
week,
Or that
yeah.
might be somebody else, but it's a very 20s feel that week. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's sort of 9:00.
9 o'clock on Mondays.
Yeah.
The second series. I don't know when the first series
Yeah.
was shown. What day?
And we've also got Michael Bates as well.
Oh gosh, yes.
Doing his best Ain't Half Hotmo impression several years beforehand, haven't
yeah.
we? And again, that's not great.
No.
I mean, there is one thing you wanted to say about, is it a Series 2 episode?
Yes.
Because in some Series 2 episodes, they basically just made the story up, haven't
Yeah,
they? They're
yeah.
not based on the short
Yeah.
stories.
I mean, there is quite a lot of short stories, but there's probably not quite enough to do 16 episodes, because there's short stories and there's sort of longer novels as well.
Yeah.
Which would probably be too difficult to do. So basically, in some Series 2 episodes, they just take the character
Yeah.
and write a story that's if you didn't know, you would swear it was Edgar Wallace.
Yeah.
And the particular one it's The Man with a Strange Tattoo, which is the
Yeah.
second episode of Series 2,
Yeah.
which is dreadfully... It's
Is it a bit sort of
It's a
racist?
little bit racist. It's very British Empire.
Yeah.
Because it's...
The Brits are right.
Yes, the thing of the British are right and the Indians shouldn't be allowed to have their own ideas. Basically, it's the story of somebody steals a ruby from a temple, and 30 years later, one of the priests from the temple comes to take it back. So it's basically like the Elgin marbles, all this sort of thing, all these things that we've plundered.
Yeah.
And this person gets shot by the woman that lives in the household. And it turns out that this is a spoiler, so if you don't want to know this, skip through this bit. The ruby was given to her by her first love, who was killed by the Indian priests for despoiling the temple.
Isn't Dino Shafiq in that
Dino
one?
Shafiq is the priest in it,
Yeah,
So
yeah.
at least he's Indian, at
Yeah.
least. So yeah, but it's apparently it's quite romantic according to Miss Bellman, and I don't find it at all romantic. It's the one time where Mr. Reader doesn't sort of prosecute. I suppose because he hasn't got enough evidence, but he's also quite sympathetic towards the lady. Because it's quite romantic, and you sort of think, hang on a minute, somebody died, but I guess it's okay because he's only a foreigner.
Yeah. But again, Mr. Reader's got that Sergeant Cork thing of
Yes.
just because you're posh, you're not getting away with it.
Yes, doesn't mean you should get away with your crimes.
Anyway, let me just very quickly blast through the episodes in Series 1. So Series 1 starts off with the treasure hunt.
Yes.
The mysterious disappearance of Sir James Tithermite's wife.
Yes, Lady Tithermite.
Yeah, and that's the one with John Bennett in, isn't
Yes.
it? Yeah. But that episode only exists on a slightly wonky tape,
Yes.
doesn't it? The rest of the
Yeah.
series exist in fairly decent quality. There are even 2 episodes that survive in colour
I
from
know.
Series 2. Gosh.
Wow.
Yeah. But that's quite a good sort of intro
Yes.
to how devious Mr. Reader's mind can
Yeah.
be, because it's the thing. He has a criminal mind and sees evil in everything.
Yes.
Yeah, so he can think how criminals think.
Yeah, and he suspects that Sir James has killed his wife, but he hasn't got any way
But
of
he
proving
needs somebody
it.
to prove it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he plants in sort of John Bennett's head that there's treasure in the
Yeah.
basement of this little lodge.
Yes.
And actually, it's the body of the
Of
the lady,
woman,
isn't
yeah.
it?
Yeah.
But that's quite a fun one. A Stealer of Marble.
That's bonkers.
That's bonkers and involves a lady stealing, was it marble from...
Marble from a park.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And graves as well, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
And
And
she's
used-
going to make carbon dioxide.
Yeah,
Yeah,
to
so
murder
there's a bit of
people
chemistry.
with. Yeah.
Both of those are directed by Kim Mills, and I really like the bit at the start of that episode where Kim Mills has put the camera on a bit of a wonk, and you follow a character downstairs, and
Yeah.
it's like sort of 30-degree
Yeah.
wonky camera.
Yeah.
There's no reason for doing that.
No, it just looks
to
good.
it's just to be
Yeah.
bonkers.
Yeah.
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 Episode 3 is the Green Mamba. Mm-hmm. That's the Mo Liskey one, King
Yes.
of the Underworld.
Yes.
They describe Mr. Reader as being like a mamba.
Yes, because he strikes.
Yeah, he will
Yeah.
he will strike, and then you will
You'll be
be
dead.
bitten on the arse by
Yeah.
Mr. Reader.
Yeah.
Sheer melodrama.
That's the Michael Bates one.
That's Tommy Fenello, a notorious forger. There's quite a bit of forgery and stuff going on, isn't there, in these stories?
Mm-hmm.
The Strange Case, that's the Sellington Refugee Fund.
Yes.
That's one with Edward Fox in.
Yes, and opium dens.
Yeah.
And somebody dressed as a Chinaman who's not. Yeah.
I was going to say that happens in series 2 as well, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's directed by Dennis Vance.
Mm-hmm.
There's one, The Poetical Policeman, where Hugh Burden actually gets the writing credit.
He does. Yeah. We did a video about that one.
Dramatised by Hugh Burden, yes. So if you want to know more about that one, seek out our video for that one. The Troop, that's Art Lomer and his troupe of actors, isn't it?
Yes.
That one's quite devious. The way they set up the crime is incredibly complicated.
Yes.
But it's good. It's good. Then series 1 ends with The Investors, which we'll go through
in a minute.
Yeah. Series 2 is The Duke. Duke Dorsey, a notorious Chicago gangster.
He's a gangster, yeah.
With Ray McAnally.
Mm-hmm. And with an accent.
Yeah. Man with a Strange Tattoo, which you already talked about.
Mm-hmm.
The Shadow Man.
Yes. That's the really weird one, isn't it? With John Stratton.
The Shadow Man, Hallity, a bank manager, has withdrawn the largest possible sum from his branch and vanished. That's dramatised by Trevor Preston.
Yes.
So, who's lurking about on Ace of Wands at this point as well, because we're into 71 now.
Mm-hmm.
Death of an Angel, Clara White, a silent film actress, has been murdered.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the Amanda Berry one?
That's the Amanda Berry one.
Yeah.
And Victor Madden.
Yeah.
And Michael Gwynn from 40 Towers.
The Willing Victim. Someone is trying to kill Mr. Reader. A bomb arrives at his office. A car nearly runs him over and he's almost hit by falling masonry.
Yes, and that's got Harry Taubin, isn't it?
That's directed by Jonathan Olwyn.
Yes.
So, yeah. Fatal Engagement. Popular musical comedy star Betty Malone is murdered. Certain peers of the realm are connected.
Oh, yeah, that's the one that opens with a shot of all these sort of pillars and a bishop.
Yeah, the bishops come to see the lady, isn't it? That's written by Louis Marks.
Yes.
Yeah. Find the Lady. A debutante is spirited away just as she is presented at Buckingham Palace.
Oh, that's all to do with white slavery. And that's not even an original story.
That's the Chinese magician one, isn't it?
Yes.
Oh, yes. If you think Talons is bad, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Right.
And The Treasure House, which we saw again today. Mm-hmm. Directed by Wojtek, no less.
Yes.
Someone tries to kill Mr. Reader's friend, reformed safebreaker Larry O'Ryan. Who have you got in that being slimy?
Milton Johns.
Milton Johns in his best Milton Johns slime fest, isn't it? That's quite a fun one.
It is, yeah.
But let's quickly zoom through Series 1, Episode 8 from the 11th of June 1969. So we should say the title music, you might know if you've listened to Parsley Sidings.
Yes, it's also used for Parsley Sidings.
I believe it's called Banjo Boy.
Okay.
Apparently. So I've looked up Banjo Boy, and the Banjo Boy I keep finding sounds completely different.
Okay.
So, yeah. And I said title sequence psychedelic, and even more so in season 2 when it's in colour.
God, it hurts your eyes in colour.
Because it's all sort of Art Deco-y at first, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then they've discovered colour in 1971.
Yeah.
And I thought in the first series, you see the sort of lady dancing.
Yeah.
And Mr. Reader I thought he was a villain sneaking on because he had a sort of cloak and a hat and he looked villainous.
I think that's just his coat. I don't think it's a cloak.
In series 2, he doesn't look villainous. He just looks like a perv because he's sort of hobbling along after her.
Yeah.
He's seen a lady and he's following her. He's gesticulating with his umbrella, isn't he? Mm-hmm. But we open with David Garth and John Owen bantering over, or bartering over. They're not bantering, but they're bartering over ordering a coffin.
Yes.
Because David Garth wants a coffin. Mm-hmm. And he knocks John Owen down to £5.
Yes, and he'll take it away in his car.
He doesn't even need it delivered. He'll take it with me. You said this was rude, but I did say some of the camera angles makes John Owen's chin look like you could shovel peas off the plate with it. But, yes. Mr. Houchins made kidneys for breakfast, and Mr. Reader says he's had an ample sufficiency. Mm-hmm. Thank you, and he don't want no more. But yeah, there are missing persons in the paper, aren't there? Well, if they're in the paper, I suppose they're not missing. But,
no.
So we cut to Sir Jason's office, where Willoughby Goddard is there.
Yes.
Shall I do my Willoughby Goddard impression?
Yeah, good man.
I need to hold the microphone away.
Okay, yep.
Reader! Reader!
It's like he's in the room.
Because he's always shouting that, isn't he?
Yes.
You said he's got a picture of the king behind him.
He has, because it was like in police stations.
Yeah.
They always have a picture of the monarch.
And the monarch in this case is George V.
Yeah.
So Jason's got a picture of the king. Mr. Reader appears to have a saucy calendar up in his office.
Saucy?
A saucy calendar.
A saucy calendar.
Is saucily even saucier than
Yes.
saucy?
It's very saucy indeed.
And I get the feeling that Mr. Reader didn't want that put up.
No.
But I think Sir
Jason
Jason
made
had got it as a job lot.
Yeah.
And I think Mr. Reader probably sort of mopped his brow when he first saw
Yes.
it. But a Miss Martin arrives and says her aunt has disappeared.
Yes.
And she used to get monthly dividends, which have stopped, from the South American Arms Syndicate, which is run by a Mr. De Silvo, isn't it?
Yes.
So Mr. Reader and Miss Bellman are thinking about going to the theatre, aren't they?
I think they go to the theatre quite a lot.
Yeah. They're going to see George Arliss in The Green Goddess.
Yes.
I think Tony Hancock does an impression of George Arliss at one point. I assume it's not I assume George Arliss isn't in a green leotard leaping about, making you join in at home, is he?
So, no.
Yeah. But Miss Bellman's also getting a dividend every month.
Yeah.
£10 because she invested £1,000 from when her dad died. She got some money for a cottage or something.
Yeah, she inherited a cottage. She sells it and gets £1,000, and then she invested £1,000.
And Mr. Reader points out that £10 every month on £1,000 is a 12% return, which is really rather impressive even for then.
Yeah.
You'd have to try damn hard to get it these days. But she had to sign a secrecy thing.
Yes.
When she invested, to not let on to other people what she'd invested in, which is unusual. But apparently 17 people in 8 months have disappeared.
Yes.
And they all had money, and Mr. Reader thinks they've been murdered. Mrs. Hoochin doesn't approve of Miss Bellman, does she? She's made braised liver for dinner this time. Oh, goodness me. And Miss Bellman comes round to see Mr. Reader. She coughs up the company name, which is the Mexico City Investment Syndicate. And she's got a letter from the lawyers, Braicher and Braicher, who have offices in the same building, funnily enough. Mr. Reader goes to find the investment syndicate, but there's nobody there. They don't open the door.
No.
And there's just a door with a sign on.
Yes.
But opposite are Braicher and Braicher. And one of the Mr. Braichers is John Le Mesurier.
It is, yes.
Is it true to say he's doing full John Le Mesurier in this?
Really.
He's doing every sort of tick that you
the
from
sort of,
Sergeant Wilson.
The thing with the tongue that he does, where he sort of sticks his tongue out a little
or
bit,
putting
doesn't
his
he?
hand to his head.
To his head,
and all of that. But it sort of works in this case because he's meant to be a bit vague as the lawyer, isn't he?
Yes.
The impression he gives that he's quite disorganised. But I think actually that's actually a front,
it's a front, isn't it? Yeah.
But they're sort of washing their hands of Mr. De Silvo and his company. And they had a file with all his sort of details in, which has been stolen.
Of all his clients.
Of all his clients, which has been stolen.
Yes.
From the safe. One day it was there, and the next day it wasn't. Mr. Reader doesn't really get an answer about whether this was investigated or not.
No.
So Mr. Reader goes to phone Miss Bellman's office about the theatre, but she's not there. And the woman there said she had an appointment with Braicher and Braicher, and John LeMage denies it, doesn't he? So we then cut to Mr. Reader at home pacing up and down, and he's worried, isn't he?
Yeah.
And he can't sleep, and Mrs. Hoochin thinks the girl's on his mind, isn't she?
Yes.
Yeah, which she is.
Yes.
And at sort of 2 o'clock in the morning, he's gone back to his office to make a list of missing persons. 1924, it says, so no argument there about what the year is. He gets a phone call from the inspector, but there's no trace of her, so he adds Miss Bellman's name to the list. One of the names I noticed on the list was Michael Barrett.
Okay.
Now, Michael Barrett presented Nationwide. I can't think it's the same Michael Barrett.
Oh, it's just somebody's picked a name out, haven't they? So.
But yeah, that's the end of part 1. Part 2, Mr. Reader, there's a person to see you. And it's Harold Goodwin.
Yes.
Is it Molly Sugden's
Molly
brother
Sugden's
from
brother from
That's My Boy?
Yeah. Yeah. And he's in Quatermass in the Pit, isn't he?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. He's got a letter from Mr. was it Ike Walker.
Yeah.
Now, in this, he's playing Wilson,
Yeah.
who's an ex-burglar. In the book, it's Mills for some reason. I don't know why they've
Maybe they didn't
changed the name.
Well, maybe because of Kim Mills.
Maybe Kim Mills, but I
Yeah.
don't know. He's brought this letter.
Yeah.
It's a weird letter, isn't it?
Yes.
So you're going to catch it and
Yeah.
it leaves you red hot or
Yeah.
something.
This is where, well, other people haven't got this, but it's coming to you, and yes, it's.
And it turns out that this letter's been infected with smallpox in the episode,
Yeah.
but scarlet fever in the book.
Hence the red hot.
Hence the red hot thing.
Also, has it actually been infected? Because he doesn't seem to have any ill effects.
No. Well, Mr. Reader goes off and disinfects his hands.
Yeah, but touches the door handle and his hat.
Yes, he does contaminate everything as he goes. But I do like the detail that you can still see what Harold Goodwin's up to.
No, you can't see, you just know.
He just tells it, sit
like,
down.
Yes.
And he sits down, thank you. Mr. Reader sort of, I was going to say uninfects himself. He disinfects himself.
Yes.
Then burns the letter,
Yeah.
doesn't he? But cheery news for Wilson that he'll be dead in a week. So cut to Sir Jason. There's a Miss Withers.
Yeah.
So we better just say Mr. Reader has a...
Well, it's the secretary for him and Sir Jason. Yeah.
And Sir Jason, well, does he choose some of them because he can bounce them on his knee,
Yes,
basically?
he chooses some of them because of the way they look and how short their dresses are, I think.
Yeah.
So,
So you've got Madeline Smith as one example.
Yeah.
In the final episode, it's Miss Hawthorne
It
from
is,
the Demons,
it is.
isn't it?
yeah, I don't think he can bounce her on his name.
But yeah, he has a variety of ladies of all classes. 'Cause who's the one that's quite upper class?
Oh, that's the one in the Fatal Engagement. Yeah, she's the one that goes and buys all these sort of.
She starts having terrible left-wing ideas,
she
doesn't
goes
she?
and buys a load of Bolshevik newspapers, doesn't
Yeah,
she?
and her dad's horrified.
Yes,
and-
she doesn't have left-wing ideas, but she's helping him. She goes and buys a load of newspapers for
Yeah.
him and stuff.
Yeah, I mean this whole world is very sort of upper class, isn't
Yes.
it? A lot of the time, though.
Yeah.
Mr. Reader does sort of dig away at it every now
He
and
does.
then.
Yeah.
Mr. Reader arrives and reports Miss Bellman's disappearance. So we have the line, "Reader, you have a criminal mind," because he's saying about it's a murder plot. So Jason is actually quite good in this because he lets him take the rest of the day off.
Yeah, he's actually
He gives him a lot of
leeway.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of bluster to Jason, but he basically trusts him.
Yeah.
And if Mr. Readers thinks he's onto something, he'll let him
You let him investigate.
But a lot of the time he
Unofficially.
says it's unofficial, and if anything happens, it's not, no
Yeah.
reflection on the office. So
The Attorney General turns up. And then Sir Jason shows off Mr. Reader's chart.
yes,
And then just takes all the credit for it, doesn't it?
yes,
Yes. So Mr. Reader goes to see Mr. Breacher and says there's a police officer going to arrest Mr. De Silva. Silvo. So John Lemage rings up his brother on the phone.
Yes. He sounds a little agitated,
He is.
doesn't he?
And can you guess who his brother is? Well, you probably can by this point, but hey.
Yeah, they make a big thing of that, don't they?
Yeah, but there's only one other person it could be.
Yeah.
John Lemage's brother turns out to be David Garth. They enjoy playing chess, don't they?
Yes.
Basically, they set it up so that Reader is going to come to their house after being told that De Silvo is here.
Is there? Yeah.
Mr. Reader turns up and they say Mr. De Silvo is lying down because he's got a headache. Yes. Again, this differs in the book
The short story. Yeah.
and the production, in that here Mr. Reader's pushed into a room where Miss Bellman is,
Yeah.
and then the roof starts to come down to crush them.
Yes.
Right, so it's real sort of like that cliffhanger in the War Games,
Yeah.
where they're in the side rat, you can call it that, and the roof's coming down and all that.
Yeah.
You said if they've murdered everybody like that, they must get through an awful lot of lamps.
Yes. A
mustn't
lot of
they?
furniture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it all gets crashed.
Yeah.
In
I
the
guess they got enough money to buy
in the
new
book,
ones.
Mr. Reader's pushed down a hole.
Yeah, like in a trapdoor.
The carpet's over a hole.
Yeah.
And then all water comes in to
Yeah.
drown them. In both cases, they're saved in a similar way.
You
but-
should say Miss Bellman is. Did you say Miss Bellman?
yeah,
was
Miss
there?
Bellman is in the room.
Yes.
that Mr. Reader's in, and Miss Bellman is also down the hole in the book. But as you said, they've really had to change this, because to do that water sequence, you'd have to film it in the water tank at Ealing, really. I think by this point in the season, they probably haven't got enough money.
No. Also, the whole thing of them pushing him down the trap hole, you'd need a stuntman for that.
Yeah.
You couldn't risk your star. It's just more practical it's just a room and you just push him in. So it's,
But before the roof starts coming down, Miss Bellman and Mr. Reader have a little, they sort of ask after each other's sort of private lives a bit, don't they?
Yeah.
They have a bit of a heart-to-heart. Because Miss Bellman's been there for quite some time.
Well, at least a day.
But Mr. Reader describes himself as a very uninteresting person. Miss Bellman's not having any of that, is she?
No.
Yeah. The Brachers don't like Mr. Reader. He's a jumped-up clerk. And you said you could hear a little bit of studio talk back at that point. I think you're right, actually. Yeah. I mean, later on, there's a bit of a dreadful boom shadow as well. And I'm sure a bit of the set wall in his house wobbled at one point as well. I think the camera smacked into it. But yeah, you do get these things, but I don't mind at all. When the ceiling's coming down, they're playing the Nutcracker Suite, apparently. Bit of irony there, and Mr. Reader gets a little bit of kissy, doesn't he?
Yeah.
As he kisses Miss Bellman on the hand. Yeah, that's as much as you can do, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
But the door opens, and it's Wilson who's breaking in.
Yes.
So he hasn't got smallpox yet, at least, has he? He's let off, basically. So yeah, it's not entirely clear whether he's infected or not.
No.
But yeah, they're stood outside the building, and that's where the boom shadow is, in the top left of the picture, if you want to see. Mr. Reader gives Miss Bellman his coat to keep her warm, because ladies catch cold, don't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As it said in the book,
Well,
she's down to her
wet.
petticoats,
Yeah,
isn't she?
petticoat. Yeah.
It's not really the case here.
No.
But Mr. Reader says he never catches cold, which is a lie.
Yeah, because he's
already caught a cold the other week, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Jump cut to achoo!
Yes.
And you said, did he really catch a cold in real life?
It's just that it sounds. If he didn't, he's a really good actor because it's very good.
It's all squeaky, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I can't do it like that. Well, I can do it like that, actually. I didn't think I could, but yeah. It's just odd that he's got a cold in 2 episodes, and it's almost suspected that.
Yeah.
Oh Christ, he's caught a cold, so
better write it in.
We better write it in. I genuinely don't know, because there's a Sergeant Cork like that where he's got a cold as well.
And he just spends the whole time in bed and
But Mrs. Houchin has made Spanish onions boiled in milk for him. Oh, and he don't like onions.
No, he don't like anything, does he? Really, bless
him. He's not Miriam Margolyes, because she likes it. She likes
a raw onion. Yeah.
But Miss Bellman arrives to take his report for the public prosecutor, and she makes him drink his medicine, doesn't she? And yeah, she said she'd miss seeing him going to work. And I just wrote, has he got a cold? Good acting. And then he starts to do his report, and then does a nice sneeze right at the end of the episode.
He does.
But I think that's a really good episode for sort of showing off how strange it is. David Garth and John LeMessurier make very nice villains, don't they?
They do, yeah.
It's almost sort of hands-off villainy, isn't it? Because they're not there cackling over him.
No.
They've just shoved him into a room and basically pressed a button, haven't they?
Yes.
It's that proper sort of English, I don't want to dirty my hands with you. There are other more sort of, shall we say, down-to-earth villains. But this almost does feel like a sort of Avengers episode,
it does feel
doesn't
like an Avengers episode.
Because it's that opening scene with the coffin.
Yes.
And then and the crushing room thing and all of that sort of upper-class villainy. So,
yes.
Yeah, I think if you like...
Yeah, I mean, you could quite easily swap Mr. Reader for Steed.
Well, Steed's a lot more confident, I think. But
in the terms of being the sort of one driving the story, it could be Steed and Mrs. Peel.
But yeah, we discovered Mr. Reader, I said, via network. It has been repeated on Talking Pictures TV once or twice.
Apart from the first episode, because they decided the quality wasn't good enough.
Yeah. And some of these we must have seen 3 times at least now.
Yeah.
So it really does stand rewatching, I think, as well.
Yeah.
And I think this is definitely in my top 3 series that I wish somebody would remake. because we've talked about Carnacki.
Yeah.
And Big Finish have done Carnacki.
They have, yeah.
But somebody really needs to rediscover Mr. Reader.
Yeah.
Who would you cast? Have you got any ideas?
I don't know, because
Hugh Burton is so good. That's the thing.
Yeah, it's difficult to think who else could play the part. Because I found out today there's a radio series from 2007, but it's David Horowitz reading the stories.
Oh, it's just reading. It's not.
So it's not an actual dramatisation.
Yeah, that's a shame. Yeah. But I'd love somebody to have a go at Mr. Reader.
I don't know who you'd cast. You'd probably make him a lot more confident as well now. Maybe.
I don't know. I don't know whether would people identify with a Mr. Reader in the Hugh Burton vein these days. I don't know.
I don't see why not.
Yeah, just an interesting thought. But we waited a long time to do Mr. Reader, and we watched them all again.
Yeah.
And I read a lot of the short stories again, and you got the TV Timeses. So there is quite a lot of Mr. Reader out there if you do start to dig.
Yeah.
And I've still got to read some of that, because you've got some hardback books that I'd never even seen.
They're American ones.
Yeah.
So they're published in America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're the one I've got here is The Case Files of Mr. J.G. Reader, which is a Wordsworth edition.
That's quite a modern edition.
And that's quite a modern one, and that's got quite a few of the short stories in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I decided when I was looking around that I'd try and find some of the older versions. So the American ones I've got, I think, are 60s ones.
Yeah.
Or possibly slightly older.
So this has got Room 13, which is the sort of prequel episode, if you like. Then The Poetical Policeman, Treasure Hunt, The Troop, Stealer of Marble, Sheer Melodrama, Green Mamba, Strange Case, and The Investors. And then Terror Keep, which is a much longer one as well.
Yeah.
So if you can find that, if you want a bit of Mr. Reader fiction, it is there.
If you read books like on a Kindle or whatever, there's various
You've
different
got some, haven't you?
Yeah, full Edgar Wallace works.
Yeah.
But you do have to bear in mind they are very much of their time.
Oh, absolutely. But there we go. But there's The Mind of Mr. J.G. Reader. Seek it out.
Yes.
Anyway, that's the end of this episode. Gosh. So it's been a while since we released.
Yes.
But
there's been various
we got there in the end.
Yes.
So thank you as always to everyone who's helped with it. And I do have stuff in the can for the next one already.
Do? Yeah.
So I do have a folder with 2 things in it.
Gosh.
And I'm not entirely sure what we're going to do.
No.
We've got half an idea.
We have, yeah.
But in the meantime, thank you for listening, and hope to see you again soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That was episode 66 of Round the Archives.
Starring Lisa Parker, Andrew Trowbridge, Nick Goodman and Martin Holmes.
Thanks also to Paul Chandler.
On the musical side, you heard Dan Tate and Paul Chandler.
The script for The Mind of Mr. J.G. Reader, The Investors, was by Gerald Kelsey, adapted from the story by Edgar Wallace.
And the producer was Kim Mills.